Đình Tuấn xin hân hạnh đến với quý vị cùng chương trình Câu chuyện bất động sản. Thưa quý vị, trong số phát sóng ngày hôm nay, chúng ta sẽ cùng thảo luận về chủ đề các giải pháp điều tiết thị trường nhà ở, bài học từ Singapore. Xin mời quý vị cùng Đình Tuấn gặp vị khách mời của chương trình ngày hôm nay, Phó Giáo sư Tiến sĩ Sin Lu Lee, Nguyên trưởng khoa bất động sản Đại học Quốc gia Singapore. Thưa quý vị, trong số này chúng ta sẽ cùng thảo luận 3 nội dung chính sau đây: các giải pháp thúc đẩy thị trường nhà ở, các giải pháp hạ nhiệt thị trường nhà ở và giải pháp áp dụng cho thị trường nhà ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Chào mừng quý vị đến với phần 1 của chương trình Câu chuyện bất động sản. Trong phần 1 chúng ta sẽ cùng tìm hiểu về các giải pháp thúc đẩy thị trường nhà ở. High profit. Mention about the cyclic nature of the real estate residential market. Can you elaborate a little bit more about this nature?
If we look at the real estate market, if we look at a graph of the market, we find that there will be ups and downs. So the real estate market is characterized by booms and slumps. Okay? But as to how long each cycle of boom and slump will be, different markets will show a different characteristic. Okay? Usually the booms will be associated with high economic growth, full employment, and capital being attracted to invest in real estate market. But the slumps will usually be associated with recession. Like for example, if we look back, we have the Asia financial crisis, and then you get a real estate slump. The global financial crisis in 2008, and then you get most markets facing real estate slumps.
So does it really applicable to all the market, or is only to Singapore or in emerging market?
It's not applicable to all markets because in fact after the global financial crisis in 2008, the Singapore market experienced a slight dip, and after that it moved up very strongly again. It was actually entering a boom phase in 2007, but with the Lehman collapse, it sort of dipped down slightly. But since 2009, it has been moving up strongly.
Yeah, so that's why I want to ask about the housing market in Singapore right now. Is it in the in the booming, or is it in the slumping?
It is in the boom phase, right? And as I say, since 2007, except for a slight dip at the end of 2008, early 2009, it has been moving up very strongly. And the Singapore government has been trying to introduce all sorts of measures to pull back the market, to cool the market.
Cool it down.
Yes.
Okay, so from the perspective of the government and perspective of developers or the investor, buyers, how to manage the boom and the burst or the slump that in the housing market? What kind of measures?
Actually, I would say that the government will be the one that has got the best measures to manage the market through balancing supply and demand, through sort of ownership, changing the rules and policies on ownership, and also through fiscal and monetary measures such as higher loan amount or even taxation, things like that. So the government is the one that can really try to manage the market. As for developers, it's very limited. Developers can only try to hold back their completion, hold back their sales if prices have fallen too low, but some developers won't be able to do that. Only those with very great capital, deep pockets, then they can hold back. As for investors, it can be both good and bad. People who do not need to get high loans, right? Especially when the market is down and interest rates are low, it is a good time for them to buy and invest.
So about the investor in Singapore, I mean individual investor, are they those arbitrageurs or are they the end user?
Okay, actually, when the market was booming, during several periods, there were many speculators. They were not really end users buying to live in the property. They were what some analysts call flippers. So they would buy units and then they would quickly unload and make huge profits. So over the last two booms, the government tried to introduce measures to prevent too much speculation, because these people drove up the prices and the actual purchasers are the ones who suffer.
So what are the applicable measures to boost the building market in the housing market in Singapore?
Well, as I said just now, the government is the one that will have the control, right, ability to boost the market. Okay. So in a time when the market is rather quiet and not many transactions, what the government can do is to try and reduce the supply, right? So in the case of Singapore, the government will stop or suspend the land sales. They will also sort of tweak or change the amount of loan that buyers are allowed to get, right? If the market is quiet, to encourage buyers, the government can say, okay, ask the banks to give higher quantum for the loan, and also to ask developers to give deferred payment, so the buyers just pay upfront 20% and the rest of the 80% will be paid on completion.
Thưa quý vị, bây giờ chúng ta tạm dừng cuộc trò chuyện này trong ít phút trước khi bước sang phần 2 của chương trình.
Kinh tế Việt Nam không ngừng phát triển, mà sự phát triển của địa ốc luôn gắn liền với sự phát triển của nền kinh tế Việt Nam.
Hãy đón xem bản tin địa ốc của chúng tôi vào lúc 19h30 trên SBNC.
Chương trình Câu chuyện bất động sản phần 2 xin được trở lại cùng với quý vị. Chúng ta cùng thảo luận về các giải pháp hạ nhiệt thị trường nhà ở. Prof. Sim, can you share with us a little bit more about what might be the causes for the housing boom?
Usually, it will be an interaction of several factors. One of the main factors would be a shortage in supply. So you have many buyers chasing the same units. Secondly, it's usually the liquidity. A lot of funds flowing in, maybe from external sources or low interest rates, so that people find that it's very worthwhile to invest in property. And this has been happening in the case of Singapore for several years. Analysts have said that Asia will be the growth center, looking at what is happening in Europe and the US. And because of this, in the last few years, a lot of capital has been attracted to Asia. And quite a high percentage of this capital moved into Singapore because of the strong Singapore dollar. So many of these funds and even individual investors, they think that with the strong Singapore dollar, what they put in into property and all will sort of help them to at least maintain or increase the value, their capital. Another reason, a recent cause in the last 2 years for property boom, especially in Singapore, is investors and even individual investors moving away from their own country, like China. China had implemented many measures to try and cool down their market since last year. And because of this, many Chinese have sort of moved their funds into Singapore. Recent reports by property agents and property companies show that the percentage of Chinese buyers has increased last year and this year, right? So it is a sort of a attraction of Singapore market, but at the same time also people moving away from investing in their own country.
Yeah, I also heard that the China market, the China buyer also going to all over the world to buy properties during this time. So with the whole big market coming from China, big fund coming from China and other countries, what measure did Singapore government apply to cool down the booming market?
Actually, the government has been trying since September 2009 up to now. They have introduced many measures. Okay, one of the important measures is the reverse, to increase land sales, to put out more parcels of land for private developers to bid and to build the private housing. At the same time, to increase the number of units for the HDB or public housing flats. So this is one measure, increasing the supply. Right? Now another measure is through taxation, to tax the profits that sellers make. Right? So one of the measures that the government has introduced is to make sellers pay stamp duty. We know that in many markets it's usually buyer who will pay stamp duty. But in the case of Singapore, the government now has introduced taxation or stamp duty for sellers. So sellers got to hold their property for at least 4 years. If a seller were to sell the property within the first year, 16% of the profit be taxed. Within second year, 14%. Within third year, 8%. And within fourth year, 4%. So the taxation is very high. Taxation of profit is very high. And the government hopes that this will deter or to stop speculation. Right? So these are some of the measures. Another measure is not to allow owners of HDB flat to buy private housing. Actually, the government in the past had allowed and had encouraged the Singaporeans to use their Central Provident Fund money to invest in private housing. But now, the measure introduced early this year, not allowed to. Another measure is regarding foreigners, to sort of have more restriction. And of course, one more is the loan amount. If businesses or group of people joining together to invest in property, they will not be allowed to get more than 50% loan, right? And if, for example, a Singaporean has already got one housing loan, already bought a property and paying one loan, for the second loan, he cannot get more than 60%. So this is like introduce measures of different types, right? Increasing the supply and then trying to deter speculation and then trying to increase the tax on the profit to prevent speculation. So there are many measures that have been introduced.
So besides the stamp duty, the sellers still have to pay the tax over their gain of their asset price, right?
Usually in Singapore, the buyer is the one who got to pay stamp duty. But now the seller got to pay stamp duty as well. So that is a form of taxing their profit. Right?
So they also have another tax for the profit. They earn their income tax as well.
Yes, actually that was introduced because of the boom in the 1995-1996. For the first time, gains or profits in property were added to the income tax. Yeah? And so, but this measure is good in the sense that when the market became quiet, the government exempted this tax to encourage people to buy again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thưa quý vị, bây giờ chúng ta sẽ tạm dừng cuộc trò chuyện này trong ít phút trước khi bước sang phần 3 của chương trình.
Hệ thống tài chính ngân hàng là huyết mạch của nền kinh tế. Với những tin tức, những câu chuyện và những nhận định của người trong cuộc, tạp chí ngân hàng trên kênh FBNC sẽ giúp quý vị hòa với nhịp đập của kinh tế Việt Nam và thế giới. Hãy đón xem tạp chí ngân hàng của FBNC vào 19 giờ 30 phút thứ 6 hàng tuần.
Chương trình Câu chuyện bất động sản phần 3 xin được trở lại cùng với quý vị. Trong phần 3 chúng ta sẽ trao đổi về giải pháp áp dụng cho thị trường nhà ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Prof. Sim, can you share your view about the current situation of the housing market in Ho Chi Minh City right now?
Well, my sense is that there is a huge oversupply because I think for the last 5 years, especially starting in 2005, the property market was doing well. 2005, 06, 07, the market's doing well. And therefore, many developers entered the market, right? And many developers embarked on very big projects. Okay? And it was actually quite easy to enter the market as a developer by getting joint venture partners. Also that I think initially people were buying properties and sort of reselling them and making good profits. So many projects started, right? And of course came the Lehman collapse, the global financial crisis in 2008, and because many of these projects started in 2-3 years before that period, now there's a huge oversupply. And I think Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City, is facing very high inflation rate, one of the highest, I think, in Asia. At one point, I thought I read that the inflation rate was as high as 20%, but maybe now it's gone down to maybe 15, 16,
or 18%.
Yeah, about 18, still about 18%. So because of this high inflation rate and also very high interest rates. I understand that interest rates is something like between 20 to 24%. So it makes it very difficult for individuals. $50 leasehold. So maybe the government can relax this restriction for a start, maybe for Vietcus, because actually their origin is Vietnamese. And I think many of them got money, right? Those who work overseas or businesses overseas, if they are given a leasehold of 50 years, that may not be an incentive to buy. If they buy in Australia or Canada or US where they're living, they probably get longer lease or freehold. So why should they buy here? So maybe to relax restriction on foreign buyers, and then for other foreigners, apart from the accused, from other foreigners, maybe to sort of reduce the restriction that they got to work here for 1 year at least, and that the employer has got to certify that they have been working for a year, then they can buy. So I think a very important step is to open up the market for foreigners. And Vietnam, I think, is different from Singapore. I mean, my opinion is you have got a lot of land, you can have lots and lots of supply coming on stream. Singapore at times got to restrict foreigners because of our land scarcity, you know. Right. And I was thinking that managing booms and busts of the real estate market actually is looking short term. Every time there's a boom, the government try to intervene, and every time the market is sleeping very quiet, the government try to introduce measures. Maybe what can be done is to try and establish a stable market for the long run. And I think in a way the Singapore government has succeeded with the HDB, public housing. That forms a base for the property market, and that is like an entry point, a low entry point for people who have started working for the first few years. They can afford to buy. Then after holding the property for maybe 5 years or so, they will sell at a profit, and then they enter the private property market. So I think Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City at one stage was thinking of social housing, something like our public housing HDB flats. So maybe can go ahead with social housing or value housing, you know, low cost. Yeah.
I have to say thanks to you again. Thank you very much, Prof. Sim. Cảm ơn Phó Giáo sư Tiến sĩ Sim đã dành thời gian tham gia chương trình. Chương trình Câu chuyện bất động sản đến đây tạm dừng. Đình Tuấn xin cảm ơn quý vị đã theo dõi và hẹn gặp lại.